hopefully we'll be able to overcome the ambient noise from the show floor. We've got a distinguished panel of guests here. My name is Dean Bubley. I'm the founder of Disruptive Analysis, and I specialize in a number of areas, but particularly as an analyst, I've been watching the evolution of WebRTC since day one, just under 4 years ago. And to me, it's one of the most interesting new technologies in voice and video communications I've seen in the last decade, because it enables the democratization of communications across a huge variety of application developers, enterprises, and then outside of those areas into the consumer and telecoms domain as well. And I'm certainly seeing a lot of new products and services on the enterprise side, whether it's unified communications, contact centers, or what I'll talk about later, hopefully we get the panel to disagree a bit on, is disunified communications and whether that's more important than UC. My own predictions on this is that probably by the end of the decade, getting on for 900 million people will be using WebRTC in a business-related context. Some of them from inside a unified comm system, and some via a web or cloud-based platform. So I'm going to allow the panel now to introduce themselves. We've got an interesting variety of speakers. So I'd like to, given we've only got 30 minutes and there's 5 people, I'll shut up and I'll give them 2 to 3 minutes each to introduce themselves, their companies, and what they're doing for enterprise communications through WebRTC. I'll start first with Dag.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Dag. I come from appear.i. We are one of the largest WebRTC-based services for consumers around. I say one of the largest because now that Messenger and Hangouts are in the game, we are pretty much outcompeted there. But we are, I think, the service with most usage of actual video in WebRTC. So we started out as one of the first back in July 2013, and we've been going at it since then, focusing primarily on end users and consumer, not business. So WebRTC and disunified communications. For me, WebRTC is not something that does something fundamentally new. I mean, we've had video communications for a while, but what WebRTC brings to the table is that it's so much simpler to use than ever before, and it allows you to create new user experiences that we just couldn't before, thanks to being available in browsers and being so much simpler. And I think that's really what's going to help us create new services and new use cases that we haven't seen before with video. So that's me.
Doug, how are you seeing the use of WebRTC for business to consumer, B2C applications?
Actually, well...
So things like contact centers or people communicating via the web page.
Yeah, so we actually have a lot of requests for that, mostly in the sense of in education and healthcare, where there are people calling into a service for example, right now we had someone calling in for a sleep apnea type of service where you can call in, talk to a doctor for half an hour, get sent home an Internet of Things device, do the measurements, send them into the doctor, and then have a new call talking about your problems. So those kind of use cases are definitely interesting.
Okay. Now I'd like to introduce Greg Zweig, who's the Director of Solutions Marketing for GENBAND. Greg.
Thanks a lot, Dean. Greg Zweig, as you said, from GENBAND. You may or may not be familiar with GENBAND, but we're one of the world's largest providers of communication solutions for service providers and large enterprises. One of the things that most people know us for is in 2010 we acquired Nortel's carrier assets. So that gave us a wide portfolio here in the UK. We were one of the very first, I think actually technically, Dean, we're the first company to launch a WebRTC gateway, if I'm not mistaken. I turn to you to make sure that's a correct statement. So we've been involved in WebRTC since the very beginning, and I think we share Dean's sort of vision for where WebRTC is going. One thing I think that, I'll try and stir the pot a little bit, I think one thing that we see in this space as we've sort of progressed, when we first started looking at WebRTC, we really looked at it as a tool to sort of expand our existing solutions, and we've done that. But I think what we're seeing now is there's a real need out there to create finished solutions. So one of the challenges when you create new technology is there's all these things that you could do in parentheses. And I think the problem a lot of you out there face is that having the potential is a great thing, but it doesn't help you if you have to spend 5 years trying to figure out how to make that potential into something that your end users can actually get value from. So one of the things I see a company like ourselves doing is we're transitioning to build more and more sort of complete solutions, and we think that that's one of the key elements that's required in order to bring this whole marketplace forward.
Very, very quickly, are you seeing any particular leading applications and solutions, either industries or particular verticals?
Well, I would say given, we're biased because we have a whole portfolio of unified communications assets that we already have. So we're basically creating solutions to enable those. There may be other offers, but that's an area that we naturally focus on.
Okay. Next up, Mike Wilkinson from Broadsoft. Mike.
Good morning, everyone. So for those of you who don't know who Broadsoft are, we're one of the leading cloud UC vendors out there. So we work with service providers. We supply about 600 service providers worldwide. Sort of familiar names in this
Mike,
particular... Can you not hear me?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Quiet.
Okay, how about that? Is that a bit better? Yeah, okay. So we power the likes of Gamma, BT in the UK for their cloud UC services. And we're very much looking at WebRTC in a couple of different contexts. One is to extend the capabilities of our UC functionality beyond the enterprise, and take a standard UC function, chat, video comms, voice comms, etc., and project that outside the enterprise on an ad hoc basis. So for example, when I'm doing calls with our PR company on a weekly basis, I probably have 10 people on a WebRTC call into me on my UC connection, bringing them together to make sure we're coordinating things. Sort of going beyond that, we've got WebRTC working in the contact center solution. There's quite a lot of contact center ISVs contacting us and to look to integrate WebRTC into the solutions that they have today. And also looking in terms of video comms as well, having video comms integration. Those are sort of the main three areas that we see service providers being brought into around WebRTC right now. However, we're starting to see increased verticalization as well, but that means more in-depth discussion with service providers. We have a group within Broadsoft who looks specifically at the hospitality sector, so we're working with some of the larger hotel chains to look at how they can integrate things like WebRTC into their customer experiences.
Okay, so it's very much sort of UC-centric, but with some contact center use cases as well.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, next up, Rob Pickering from IP Cortex. Rob.
Hi there. I'm CEO and founder of IP Cortex. We're a UK-based comms software developer, and we've been working with WebRTC since the very, very early days, actually about the turn of 2011, 2012. We've just released Kivio, which is our first complete full solution, which is a turnkey WebRTC-based communication solution for mid-sized enterprise, and it brings all of the traditional comms functions into a single web platform. And I think it's quite interesting actually what Greg was talking about earlier, that WebRTC really for us is just, or I'm an engineer, and my perspective on WebRTC is that it's really just good plumbing. It's a set of tools that allow you to get conversations from A to B seamlessly and have things work really well in an environment. It's actually about the full solutions. Folks out there that are consuming the technology, you're going to be consuming WebRTC-based solutions, not WebRTC itself, just like you don't consume HTTP or you don't consume phone systems.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that, Rob. And last up, Roger Jones, EMEA CTO for Sonus. Roger.
Thank you. So for those of you who might be concerned, we're not going to talk about Wi-Fi speakers and multi-room audio today. That is a different company. A lot of people get mixed up. I'm from Sonus rather than Sonos. We are a company that makes session border controllers, and we have just launched our WebRTC gateway. So I'm going to give Greg certainly one up here because they were definitely in front of us there. Also, just a quick plug, if you want a WebRTC for Dummies guide, I am last, Dean, so I've got to get my money's worth here. WebRTC for Dummies guide is on our booth. Where we see WebRTC, I really see three places, Dean. Contact centers, clearly. Enterprises who've got a single vendor PBX platform will probably get a WebRTC gateway from the PBX vendor. Enterprises that have more than one PBX platform, then you're going to look at a vendor-independent WebRTC gateway. And the other place we see is really in the service provider market, in the triple play, quad play, where they want to deliver real-time communications to TVs, set-top boxes, all that good stuff as well. So,
interesting. I'm not going to open it up to everyone, but what I take from this, primarily, maybe not so much Doug, is this is, from your point of view and from enterprise, more about adding the web and perhaps video to an existing communication system rather than adding communications to the web or an app.
Well, I think so, because we are traditional sort of telecoms vendors, and our background is, as it is with Greg, it's in security, web, internal platform, security issue, border. That's our direction we're coming from.
Great.
Well, Dean, I think the one thing that's really interesting that's probably in the last 6 or 9 months that I've seen happen, that's a little bit of a transition, is we're seeing a demand for more of a mashup model. Because if you go up on Yahoo today, right, and you check the weather, you know that Yahoo doesn't literally provide that weather. It's just a mashup from some other service. And I think we're starting to see now in WebRTC that same sort of a mashup model, because I give an example. One of our customers is the US Senate in the United States. And in the US Senate, they have, every user has one of our clients, a Link client, and a Cisco Jabber client. They use the Jabber for video, the Link for IM and presence, and they use us for telephony. And when we go out and see these large enterprises, what we're seeing is there's lots of people trying to rationalize. Either they have, most people don't have something quite that crazy, but it is the government after all. But a lot of people have disparate systems out there, and they're trying to figure out how to rationalize that for the user. And the disparity can include things like SAP or Salesforce.com, and I think ultimately WebRTC gives you a really clever way of putting one client on the user's desktop, but the user doesn't necessarily know they have a client. They just have one portal where they go and get communication and data assets. And I think, in my mind, that's really where the world's going to go.
And in that situation, who creates the portal? Yeah, if you're combining all those different sort of back-end solutions.
Well, it's a combination, right? Since it's a web interface, in many cases it's a web developer who's going to do it, and he's going to grab our assets for communications, he's going to grab Salesforce.com assets, whatever else they need from a web perspective. I mean, one of the things we've tried to do is we have actually built a WebRTC client for Link. We've actually built a way that you can integrate Google Apps into a WebRTC environment just to make those things easier for people.
Okay. Rob, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Dean has this theory of disunified communication that effectively says that it doesn't matter that you don't bring things together all into one place, but I actually think it's quite important that things get brought together into one place at one end of the conversation or the other. So we're quite used in a telecoms model to, kind of everything being in one place, this telephone at both ends of the conversation. I think WebRTC is going to change that a little bit because you have this whole thing of contextual communication, which means that your users will go visit a website that might be your own website, and within the context of a workflow, they'll want to communicate with you, and therefore they will communicate in that context, which is very, very low friction. But the problem is you've got to pull off the other half of that inside, and I think this is exactly like your Congress example, I think. that to actually give that frictionless workflow internally, you've got to bring it all together. So you're going to end up with effectively a unified communications at one end of the conversation or the other. It would be great if it were both ends, but I think that's too hard to pull off, right?
I don't know that the user knows it's a UC client. I don't think they have to. It doesn't have to say UC client on it somewhere for it to be together.
But the problem is if you don't do that, you have this model like we have with messaging systems at the moment where if I want to talk to someone, I've got to work out whether they're on WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger and all those things. And you know, this kind of disunified communications doesn't add any value. Contextual communications don't add any value because you're dragging users into these contexts they don't even want to be in order to communicate with you.
Doug,
So I come from a web world, so I'm a JavaScript developer, and I don't know any of the PBX or backend system, that kind of stuff. So I think I have a different perspective on this. Yeah. So to me, what WebRTC is that it allows you to stop thinking about technology and start thinking about user experience and much greater effort. So to me, it's nice interoperating with the gear that you have, but I don't think we're in the future with WebRTC going to call zip addresses, for example. So right now, you're going to share a link because everyone in the world knows how to share a link, and you're just going to talk on that platform that they provide. And this unification is actually going to create a lot of context around that. So interoperating is good, but I don't think that's going to be the big mark for WebRTC.
Mike, I'll I'll morph from this into this idea of disunified communications, and in some cases it's putting communications as a feature into applications, or then it's extending existing perhaps UC platforms. Where do you sit on that?
Well, we're seeing increasing amounts of disunified communications appearing. I mean, if you just look at Broadsoft, I was in a meeting a couple of weeks ago. Our CEO was tearing his hair out that we had 6 or 7 different project management tools which have come in through shadow IT. And that's the sort of environment that's beginning to occur in a lot of enterprises now. So the question is, how do you start to bring all of those things together? And certainly, WebRTC can be used as a way of getting communications into those applications in a very cheap manner, because from our standpoint, it's the unit cost of the delivery of those services to the end user is an issue, okay? So WebRTC effectively pushes that cost down to 0, i.e. it's a web browser. So that's great. So if you look at a lot of the contact center guys at the moment, they're in effect bypassing existing PBX estate and going straight through to things like Chromebooks and so on. So they don't even have to use the voice infrastructure that's already in place. So WebRTC enables that. So if you have WebRTC capability starting to be embedded in a multitude of different business applications, not just unified comms, so you go into Salesforce, you go into Basecamp, Bright, you name it, then you have to be able to coordinate all of that. And I guess you can do that at the service provider layer, but that takes a lot of time and effort, and there's a lot of expenditure in terms of IT to do that. So some of the areas that we're looking at is almost a service orchestration layer above that. So you take the UC capability and start to build it in at the service provider layer with all the various different well-known cloud business applications to make life easy.
Thanks. Okay, I'm going to change tack a little bit here. Where are you seeing real-world deployed, used WebRTC today? Who is actually using it in anger?
Contact centers, enterprise extension, and there are now some video conferencing stroke collaboration applications out there as well. Those are the 3 main areas we see right now.
Any particular verticals or groups or functional units?
I think we're talking to a lot of major hotel groups, as I said, in the hospitality sector. I don't expect that to see the light of day until sometime in 2016.
I would say higher education. I would agree with your points in general. I think that those are the right verticals. Obviously, we're a similar business, so we see a lot of the same customers. I would say higher education is also an area that's quite interested because they have faculty on one end and they have a student body on the other end, so they have kind of a very diverse set of potential users.
Doug?
Yeah, so we see the same thing. Education is definitely going to be big. We get a lot of questions. So we have Red Cross uses us for home tutoring in Norway, and we have a lot of Southeast Asia, actually, companies wanting to use us for healthcare and educational platforms in Southeast Asia, and that's actually really, really interesting, I think.
Well, I'm surprised because whenever I ask this question normally, certainly in the US, I get finance as an answer, and people point to American Express and others as putting WebRTC into their customer service applications and others.
That's true.
Any feedback on that, or is that different here, or is that just a...
That's contact center,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So,
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So Dina, we have come across one other one in the emerging markets where there's a strong heritage of calling cards. Some of you will have seen them in the aeroplane magazines. WebRTC is now a platform-independent way of those calling card companies reaching people in a different way, still selling them very, very cheap minutes because the people they're calling, as Rob said, on the other end probably aren't using WebRTC. So it gives those calling card organizations a completely app-free, client-free thing. So we have one organization that is working on that quite strongly at the moment. So that's a completely different type of use case.
Okay, Rob.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us it tends to be two things, and I think this is about the kind of maturity of the technology and the logistical challenges about things like browser support. So there's kind of point applications, which are, a video conferencing app or, an Amazon Mayday type button, that kind of thing. And then there is the taking an existing system, an existing UC type system, and putting a web front end on it, the sort of the call center on a Chromebook type thing. And they're the two things. And I think that just plays to the kind of the maturity of the technology and the availability of it. I think that's just an early thing. It will be a bit like saying, now who are the major vertical adopters of telephones.
Okay, fair enough. I'm going to open it up to the audience in a second, but it's a quick question I realise we didn't discuss up front, is how important at the moment do you think browser support is, particularly Explorer and to a degree Apple?
Yeah, so I guess since we're an end user product, we see a lot of that. And our experience is that the browser support doesn't matter anymore. I mean, it matters perhaps in enterprise because you guys haven't rolled out anything but Internet Explorer for a while. But in consumer markets, people are used to switching to Chrome or Opera or Firefox already. They have several browsers installed, so it's not a problem in the consumer market.
I think that there's still challenges there. It would be nice, I guess you could say, for lack of a better term, if we could move Internet Explorer and Safari along. There's a lot less friction than there was a few years ago because most people do run multiple browsers. I do think, honestly, we will be a bit challenged just by the fact that there's an awful lot of updates that come out from Mozilla and Chrome and everyone else, and those updates don't always make things better. So there's challenges.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be too much of an impact in the business market, but certainly as you go into consumer, where there's less education, people won't, there's a segment of the consumer market that won't even understand whether they've got multiple browsers.
Yeah,
right, exactly.
So you have to be able to accommodate that market.
And what about the idea of browser plugins? There's a couple of companies now that allow you to WebRTC enable IE if you want to.
Yeah, we've done that. We've done it.
Oh, you've done it.
Yeah.
Does it work well?
It works.
Yeah.
I wouldn't use Internet Explorer if you paid me. Sorry, Microsoft.
I mean, I think browser support is actually the elephant in the room with WebRTC, and we can play it down all we like, but the fact is a huge proportion of the browser market out there don't support it, and there's an even bigger issue actually with the Microsoft announcement about the upcoming support, and they've announced they're going to support it, but they've not said which browser, whether it's Spartan or IE. And there's a big problem because Spartan's not going to support the legacy applications. So that's going to be a big issue for enterprise UC because all those, it's almost going to be WebRTC or your existing enterprise ActiveX applications, which is going to be interesting when that finally settles.
Okay, right. I've got time for one or two questions from the floor if anyone has an urgent one. Okay. Actually, looks like I'll carry on in that case. Oh, where? Oh, gentleman here, second row.
Brave man.
Hi. Question for Greg.
You've got a better microphone than we do.
Yes.
Do you have any specific use cases that you're able to share with us that you're working with? Anybody?
I would say in most environments in higher ed, I would say rather traditional UC environments, and the challenge they face is that they're trying to figure out a way to better connect the faculty and student body together. I mean, one of the biggest challenges in higher ed, obviously, is the whole security aspect of the fact that in many cases, the most dangerous people from a security perspective are people who have access to their network, which is a rather atypical model for a business environment where the firewall protects you from the people. So they're looking for ways to sort of break down that whole barrier. So, right, that's
Mike, you looks like you had a...
So I think there's a couple of different areas we're seeing right now. One is where, in the student dormitories, then you're basically having connectivity into them, giving them basically voice and video connectivity together, right? Because you don't want to be putting a phone in there. It's like hotels, right? It's just too expensive to do that. So WebRTC allows you to do that very cost effectively. The other area is we're seeing higher ed starting to look at integrating WebRTC into learning management systems, things like Blackboard.
Yeah.
So you're having that plug-in, so it effectively allows it to be more, I guess, synchronous in terms of the learning experience.
Yeah. Distance learning.
Yeah.
There's another question here. I'd agree. Higher education, I'm seeing quite a lot. There's actually an EU project looking at WebRTC's role within sort of video conferencing at for an EU research project. Maybe talk offline about that. So.
Hi. Following on the question about the point about browser compatibility that was mentioned earlier. So are the browsers sort of stratifying into the ones that have got competing WebRTC applications and the ones that haven't?
No, sorry.
So you're meaning sort of
So you've got
Chrome has Hangouts.
Chrome has Hangouts and Skype for Business is very much linked to Microsoft.
Hello. For sure, I guess there's the business aspects behind it, but it is a web standard, so it should be implemented by all browsers. I mean, Internet Explorer is working on it. They have ORTC, and they have been great working with the community, and ORTC group is very active. And they're taking a lot of that into the WebRTC standard as well. So yeah, I guess the business aspect of it is driving the adoption of it.
Greg's comment about it, the updates don't always make it better is quite critical if you start to rely on these facilities.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely, you require a team working. Today, if you're going at this from scratch, you need a team working full time on it, basically. Our biggest problem now is that Firefox has implemented a standardized way of doing multi-stream support, while Chrome has had it for a long while, but they have a totally different standard, and those are not intercompatible. So
we don't have time to discuss it now because we're unfortunately short, but there's also one of the reasons that the platform as a service model for WebRTC is growing fast is to abstract some of those difficulties to a cloud provider of some sort, and quite often they'll also bring in mobile capabilities. We're about to run out of time. I can see the next chair at the back of the room. Make sure you ask him about disunified communications because I know he loves that. I'd like to thank you all very much, and also to thank our panel for an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.